Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I want to apologize to everyone who will be listening to the show or be viewing the show. Last night I lost my voice, but I wanted to continue doing the show. We bring a guest on. I'll let him describe himself. He is a former psychological warfare officer of the U.S. Army. Our great guest, Mr. Scott Bennett. Thank you for joining us.
Rashid, it's my honor. Thank you for your invitation. I appreciate it very much.
Could you tell the people about yourself just a little bit?
Well, I worked for the Bush administration from 2003 to 2008. I moved out to Washington, D.C. from California. And after the Bush administration, I joined. I was invited actually at a Pentagon briefing to join a psychological operations team that was being put together at Booz Allen Hamilton, and Edward Snowden was part of that team as well. And so I accepted the invitation. I transitioned out of the Bush administration. I went into Booz Allen Hamilton. I was also simultaneously given a direct commission in the United States Army Psychological Operations Civil Affairs Command. And I went through all the boot camp and all the training and all that. And I came out an officer. And I was then assigned to U.S. State Department liaison officer to Special Operations Command. I had a TSSCI clearance. I was also at SOCOM, CENTCOM doing, besides psychological warfare, information operations, terrorism analysis, also terrorist financing, finding banks and money laundering operations and cartels and instruments that were being used in funding terrorism. And during that process, I discovered in an Alice in Wonderland sort of revelation that Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton State Department, when she was Secretary of State, I discovered all of this in 2009. Actually, I went through 2008, 9, and 10. And Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer, the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General, as well as Loretta Lynch, and a law firm called Covington and Burling. They were all involved in this horrific cabal of corruption and terrorist financing. And I wrote a report about it. It was originally a military whistleblowing report. And it was not classified because it was a whistleblowing report. But when I wrote the report and filed it up the chain of command, saying there's Swiss banks being used here, Union Bank of Switzerland, 19,000 bank accounts that a Swiss banker brought over to the United States that Ed Snowden tracked when he was at CIA. All of this indicates massive amount of money that is being used by bad guys. And the moment I started filing reports and making phone calls, I was arrested at MacDill Air Force Base. I was charged with filling out a housing form improperly. They called it a 18 U.S. Code 100-1, the same charge they tried to file against Michael Flynn, until material in my book actually was given to Sidney Powell and Joe Flynn's brother that got him out of jail. But they threw me in jail to cover all of this up. And white hats were behind the protection of me, and they actually got me going to a different place where I was actually introduced to some of the intelligence assets that were actually being tracked in the military. So this is sort of a deep covert operation. But it's an astounding revelation of just how far and deep and corrupt our government has been since 2000. This has been George Bush, Dick Cheney, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump. I sent him my copy of my book. I sent him memos on this, so he was aware of it. What's been done, we've yet to see. But that's kind of a brief nutshell of my background.
So before we get into what's going on in the world, are you saying that you found, and I know you can't talk too much about anything about classified stuff, but I'm saying, do you think you found a connection between like the U.S. government and training and funding the terrorists that they claim that they're fighting?
Oh yeah, yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. One of the uh, one of the revelations that was given to me by a human intelligence asset that had been thrown in jail by the Obama administration. Brad Birkenfeld had been an individual that brought over all of these Swiss bank accounts. He was an American Swiss banker, and he had brought all of this material over and brought WikiLeaks cables and things like that. Well, the Department of Justice had confiscated his materials, classified them, and declared he couldn't use them in his defense, and they threw him in jail instead of instead of holding him up as a witness to a lot of this deep state. I interviewed Birkenfeld, and I got WikiLeaks cables that tied Hillary Clinton and the State Department directly to money that was being laundered through this law firm Covington and Burling and Union Bank of Switzerland into ISIS operations in Syria, in Libya. General Flynn, Michael Flynn, knew about it. That's why he wrote his memo in 2012, because we had provided the material in August of 2012 to James Mattis, U.S. Central Command, Michael Flynn, Defense Intelligence Agency, other military officers at the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Ray Odierno, General Martin Dempsey, the Senate and the Congress, the House Armed Services Committee, Intelligence Committee, Banking Committee, Foreign Intelligence Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee. I was pounced on by people like Senator Bill Nelson, who wrote to Senator Dianne Feinstein, how is this Scott Bennett getting this material? And I mean, there's a long saga of the cover up, but this directly connects to the Obama, Biden, Hillary Clinton, Eric Holder cabal, and they were financing terrorism through Swiss banks, hundreds of millions of dollars, and other things. And a lot of that also went to the biological chemical weapons labs that they were installing in Ukraine. And that was one of the main reasons for the coup d'etat in 2014. They wanted to maintain their weapon systems that they were developing to ultimately use against Russia and the development of DNA-based weapons and that sort of thing. So the black money, the dark money, the secret accounts are notorious for funding a lot of these deep operations. So that's why my reports are just a indictment of the U.S. government, specifically under Obama and Clinton, or Obama and Biden and Hillary Clinton, participating in running this. And it was all a money laundering operation. It was to get money from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Morocco, Mauritania, Niger, all sorts of Middle Eastern countries, Chad, in the U.S. Central Command area of influence of operations, and then fund that money to the Hillary Clinton Foundation in exchange for State Department favors and weapons licenses and things of that nature. And they were funding overthrow operations against Bashar Assad. They were doing overthrow operations against Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. This is what the real United States government has been doing. And when I discovered a lot of this, Rashid, I was sickened to my core that this government was the opposite of everything that the American people were brought up to believe. I mean, my father was a Marine Corps aviator in Vietnam. Uh, uh, we all, raise our hand and do an oath to the flag, and we love our country. But when you discover this sort of treachery and criminality and treason by people at the highest levels of the U.S. government, it sickens you to no doubt. And I was sickened and horrified by people in the Trump administration that knew about this too. Mike Pompeo, I sent him my reports when he was in the House, when he was a congressman. I sent it to Jeff Sessions when he was a senator. I sent it to Lindsey Graham. I sent it to John McCain. We know how much of a corrupt demoniac he is. I sent it to probably over 100 senators and congressmen, and I have it all in my book of exhibits. Every letter that went out, the CIA tried to come in and cover it up. They sent Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger, two journalists, to try and gauge what I had. I gave it to them to say, publish this. They never published a word. They simply said, Mr. Bennett, why do you think the CIA would do this? And I had never mentioned the CIA, so they were puppets for them. But that's the reality behind the curtain, Rashid. We are in a country that is run by idiots, imbeciles, maniacs, and lust-driven criminals that should all be destroyed after due process of law, of course. But they should all be given the death penalty for treason, and including several people in the Trump administration: H.R. McMaster, James Mattis, Mike Pompeo. You know, Trump is still on the fence, and we'll see if he survives this. But you know, there's a lot of criticism because all of this happened under his watch. Ukraine really happened a lot under Trump's watch because he could have stopped all of that stuff and declared Ukraine neutral so that Russia and the US and everyone would have settled down. Instead, he allowed a lot of this stuff to continue, the biochemical labs, and inciting these right-wing lunatic Nazi-loving fascists in Ukraine with Hitler tattoos all over their back. These moronic, knuckle-dragging, hills have eyes rejects are suddenly the U.S. allies. I think that's a disgusting betrayal to everything that this country is supposed to represent. So I hope and pray for a major revolution in this country where conservatives of every color, every creed, every ethnicity, those people who love the freedom and the country and the Constitution will unite into, you know, I think an archipelago of states and sovereign republics in America. And those who want to go their way of leftism, Chaz zones, and the chaos we see and the violence in some of these areas like New York and elsewhere, you know, we have to kind of walk away from those areas as dead zones. I think there has to be a renaissance in this country, and it starts with knowing what they've really been doing in Washington. And Biden, my God, you could write volumes of his little
Corruption.
girl sniffing, sexual corruption, perversion, and drug addicted lunatic son.
Well, so in words, you're saying that ISIS is a byproduct of the American government,
I'd
and
say it's a product. It's a primary product that was sought and developed in coordination with the Israeli Defense Forces, the British MI6, the CIA, Special Operations Command under Lloyd Austin when he was general in charge of training. They were funded and financed by the U.S. government to be pawns, to destabilize regimes that were trying to divorce the U.S. petrodollar dominated Rothschild bank economy. That's why they overthrew Gaddafi using the ISIS components, and Qatar and Saudi Arabia were parties, and they did the same thing in Syria. And this is confirmed by people like Senator Dick Black and Tulsi Gabbard and others who've actually been on the ground and met with Bashar Assad.
you know, speaking about the Libya operation, why did they go so far as to eliminate Gaddafi and his children? If because I'm thinking that it had to be that plus some more. They had to want to use him as an example, the way they
Well,
treated him.
you're dealing with very ruthless, maniac, drug-induced psychopaths and immoral, godless savages and heathens that are high on Captagon, are paid by CIA. They're paid. Their families are taken care of by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the royal families. So they are trained to do absolute horror. They are trained, and forgive the graphicness of the imagery and the language, but they're trained to cut off the breasts of women and cut off you know, men's heads and other members and put them in the refrigerators of their family members as warnings. They are trained to engage in horrific dissections and tortures of people. They are encouraged to do that to induce terror and fear and horror as control mechanisms. So this has been something that you can trace back to the Japanese, the Germans, the United States after World War II, MK Ultra, the CIA. They have been actively aware of how to combine psychological warfare with political color revolutions in order to overthrow regimes and create puppet governments to rape and plunder and pillage the natural resources of countries. And that's what we did to Afghanistan. That's what we've done to Libya. That's what we did to Iraq. That's what we've tried to do to Ukraine. We tried to do it to Syria. but Russia has stepped in and blocked this. And I think the days of these activities are very quickly coming to an end, and with it, the United States government as a whole, because of the fragility that exists in this country. Besides all of the corrosives, the social and mental corrosives that we have in our own political bloodstream, with homosexuality, transgenderism, LGBT this, critical race theory, pushing this on our children, causing them to be schizophrenic, destroying all sense of unifying culture, and exaggerating and accelerating civil strife. This a country divided among itself shall not last very long, and I think we are feeling the weight and the initial collapse. That's why people are reestablishing themselves in tribal sort of communities like Florida, like South Dakota, like Texas, where they're not being forced to get masks, to get death jabs from this COVID-19 vaccine, which is overwhelmingly being proven to kill everybody that gets it. Nor are they going along with all the other social communist experiments that people like Gavin Newsom and Democrats in general are trying to push upon the people. So the country is going through a quiet revolution, I think, right now.
Isn't that a byproduct of the domestic and the political policies that have been trumpeted by successive governments of the United States? This is what you call, as thou hast done, it is now being done unto the American populace because of that. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I've said that for a long time. The evil and the sin and the wickedness that we've unleashed upon the world since 20 years of war, and this was all planned. 9/11 was a planned operation.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Rudy Giuliani should be executed for treason. Bernard Kerik, Rudy Giuliani's police commissioner, should be executed for treason. Bernard Kerik went to Iraq and was a high-level secretary under Bremer and was getting paid by the Israeli Zionist IDF, and he was a spy. So besides all the other Israeli role in 9/11, Susan Lindauer, former CIA asset, has discussed this. Jim Fetzer, many, many others. The fingerprints are all there with Netanyahu and all of the Israeli Jewish Zionist sort of individuals that were behind the building, behind the insurance, behind the cover, Building 7, the nuclear event that went up inside the Twin Towers. I drove by the Pentagon the next day on Wednesday. I was doing my PhD up at Catholic University, so I drove by the Pentagon on George Washington Parkway, and I saw nothing but a big blue tarp. No plane parts, no burned grass, no skid marks, nothing that would have occurred if a big 757 had come skimming across the grass and crashed into it, which is also physically impossible for an aircraft of that size. My dad was a pilot. My uncle was a pilot of big planes. It's impossible for a plane to have crashed into the Pentagon and not left a huge mess that would have taken weeks to clean up. But instead, they left it like a pristine miniature golf lawn with just a hole in the Pentagon, where the auditors were doing audits of Dov Zakheim, who was my boss at Booz Allen Hamilton too. So God has taken me through these areas, and I've walked and got a lot of gum stuck under my shoe that when I throw it in front of a table of a law or a court or people like Michael Flynn, they panic, they turn white, they fall backwards. And there's a lot of other deeper stories in this with Sidney Powell. When I met her and Joe Flynn, when Flynn was arrested, I said, here's my book. He is being represented by the very law firm, Covington and Burling, that was doing terrorist financing. You need to get it to Flynn and fire his attorneys. Well, Sidney Powell called me later. I gave her all the stuff. She went. Flynn fired Covington and Burling, a guy named Kellner, and also the people that were behind there were Michael Chertoff, another big 9/11 profiteer who sold the electric gates and the electric doors for airports. Roger Zakheim, the son of my boss, Dov Zakheim, was at Covington and Burling. Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, they were all part of this law firm that were representing Michael Flynn to have him be quiet and take a plea deal. got my material, she filed an action in court saying, we want to know everything that Covington and Burling has been saying to the Department of Justice. The moment she did that, they dropped all charges against General Flynn because they knew the gig is up. So he's alive because I got this, and I wrote an amicus brief for him too. He's alive because this got to the judge that this will open the Pandora's box, and they didn't want to go near it. So otherwise he would have been killed. They would have killed Flynn like in a fetus position in a jail cell. So there's a lot of material there. 9/11's huge. Trump had a lot of these bad guys around him too. He had Carrick running his recount. I was in Washington in November 2020 as part of the president's analytical team with Pat Byrne and Joe